The familiar crunch of my tires on the gravel driveway was a sound that sang to my soul. It was the sound of coming home, a sound I had heard for over 20 years. I had pulled into this very spot thousands of times, with a car full of groceries, or a tired little boy asleep in the backseat after a long day, or later, a gangly teenager I had just picked up from football practice. This house was not just a structure of wood and brick. It was the museum of my life, of Marcus's life. And now it was his, our home. I shifted the heavy ceramic pot onto my hip, its warmth seeping through the towel I had wrapped around it. My famous gumbo, the very same recipe my own mother had taught me, a recipe that had filled this house with its rich, spicy aroma on countless Sundays. It was a pot full of love, of history. I had made it today on a whim, feeling a sudden, aching need to see my son, to bring a piece of that old comfort into his new life. I did not call. Surprises were part of the fabric of our family. Marcus had always loved my surprises. The front porch looked the same, though Keisha had added a new welcome mat, a bright, cheerful yellow thing with a geometric pattern. It clashed with the traditional dark green shutters I had painted myself the summer Marcus turned 16. I noted it, filed it away as a small, harmless change. I adjusted the pot, took a deep breath that smelled of okra and smoked sausage, and rang the doorbell. The silence that followed was just a beat too long. I could hear the faint sound of the television inside click off. Then, footsteps. They were light, hesitant, not the heavy, eager tromp of my son. The door opened, and there was Keisha. Her smile was a careful, practiced thing. It did not reach her eyes, which held a flicker of something I could not quite name. Annoyance? Weariness? It was gone in an instant, replaced by a polite mask. "Sharon," she said, her voice a little too high. "This is a surprise." "I was thinking of you both," I said, hefting the pot slightly. "I made gumbo, Marcus's favorite." "Oh," she said, and her eyes dropped to the pot. "That is thoughtful, come in." She stepped back, and I walked into the house that was once mine. The furniture was different. My comfortable, overstuffed sofa was gone, replaced by a low, modern sectional in a neutral gray. My collection of family photos on the wall had been curated, reduced to a few select frames. It was their home now. I had to keep reminding myself. It was their home. "Marcus is just finishing up a work call," Keisha said, hovering by the door as if unsure what to do with me. "He will be out in a minute." "It is no trouble," I said, moving toward the kitchen as if on autopilot. The layout was the same, of course. I placed the pot on the stove, the same stove where I had burned 1,000 grilled cheeses and perfected my roux. The air did not smell like my cooking anymore. It smelled like lemongrass and sandalwood, a subtle, expensive candle burning on the counter. "Can I get you something to drink?" Keisha asked. She was still standing near the doorway to the living room, not quite entering the kitchen with me. "I am fine, sweetheart, thank you." I busied myself with finding a ladle, opening the correct drawer without thinking. I felt her watching me. The silence was thick, heavy with all the things we were not saying. Then the blessed sound of his footsteps. Marcus appeared in the doorway, and my heart did its usual little leap. My boy. He was a man now, tall and broad-shouldered, but I could still see the little boy in the slope of his nose, the set of his jaw. But his smile, the one he gave me, was strained. There was a tension around his eyes that had not been there a few weeks ago. "Hey, Mom," he said, coming forward to give me a hug. It was a good hug, firm and strong, but it was quick. He pulled away and looked at the pot on the stove. "You made gumbo." "I did," I said, beaming at him. "I thought you could use a taste of home." He nodded, but his eyes flickered toward Keisha for a fraction of a second. A silent conversation passed between them. I saw her give a tiny, almost imperceptible shake of her head. My stomach tightened. "That is really great, Mom, thank you." He shoved his hands into his pockets. "Hey, it is a really nice evening. Why do we not go out back for a minute? I want to show you the rose bush. The one we planted for Dad, it is blooming." The rose bush. We had planted it the spring after his father passed. It was a ritual, our thing, but something in his tone was off. This was not an invitation to admire flowers. This was a dismissal of Keisha, a request for a private audience. A cold knot began to form in my chest, right next to the warmth of the gumbo. "Of course," I said, my voice sounding a little thin. I followed him through the sliding glass door onto the patio. The backyard was mostly the same. The old oak tree was still there, its branches stretching out over the lawn where Marcus had chased fireflies and kicked soccer balls. The swing set was gone, though. The grass was perfectly manicured, a stark contrast to the slightly wild, kid-friendly yard I had kept. Marcus did not go to the rose bush. He walked to the middle of the lawn and stopped, turning to face me. The setting sun cast long shadows across his face, making him look older, more serious. "Mom," he began, and then he stopped, rubbing the back of his neck. "I love that you come by, I really do." The knot in my chest tightened. I knew what was coming. I had heard the preamble before, in other contexts. It was the prelude to a gentle letdown. "But," I prompted, my voice quiet. He sighed, a heavy, weary sound. "But Keisha, she feels like she can never really relax here. She is always on edge, worried you are going to just pop over." The words landed like physical blows, pop over, as if my visits were an intrusion, a nuisance. I looked at the kitchen window and could see the faint outline of Keisha moving inside. She felt she could not relax in her own home. The statement echoed in my mind, each word a separate sting. Her own home. The implication was clear. This was no longer my home. I was a guest here, an unwelcome one. "I see," I said, my gaze fixed on the window. "So my bringing dinner, my wanting to see my son, that makes your wife feel uncomfortable." "It is not about the dinner, Mom," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "It is about it being unannounced. It is about the lack of boundaries. This is her space now, our space. She needs to feel that it is truly hers." Her space, our space. The words were a profound rejection of everything I was, everything I had built. This was the house where I had rocked him to sleep, where I had nursed him through fevers, where I had celebrated every birthday, every graduation. This soil was mixed with my sweat and tears, and now I was being told I needed permission to cross its threshold. "I have always been welcome here," I said, and I heard the tremor in my own voice. "This has always been my home too." "It was," Marcus said softly, and the past tense was a dagger to my heart. "It was our home, but now it is mine and Keisha's, and things have to be different. For us two to build our own life, we need a little distance." Distance, from me, the one person who had always been there, no questions asked. I looked at my son, my beautiful boy, and I saw a stranger, a man who was choosing his wife over his mother. It was a natural progression, I knew that intellectually. But feeling it, hearing the words spoken in this sacred place, was a kind of agony I was not prepared for. I wrapped my arms around myself, suddenly cold despite the warm evening air. The scent of my gumbo, that beautiful, familiar scent, wafted from the kitchen, but it now smelled like a mistake, like a relic from a time that was gone. "So what you are saying is that I am no longer welcome unless I call first," I said, stating it plainly, needing to hear him say it. Marcus looked pained. "Mom, please do not make it sound like that. I love you. I will always love you. This is just about respecting our privacy, our marriage." I nodded slowly, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. The backyard, once a place of so much joy, felt alien and hostile. The shadows from the oak tree seemed to stretch toward me like grasping fingers. I had come here today with a pot full of love, and I was leaving with a heart full of shattered glass. I turned away from him toward the house. I would go back inside, I would say my polite goodbyes, and I would leave. But as I took a step toward the patio, a new, more terrifying thought occurred to me, freezing me in place. If this was the new rule, if my presence required an appointment, then what did that mean for the future? What about holidays? What about the grandchildren I dreamed of holding? Would I need to schedule time with my own grandchildren in the house I built? The question was so devastating, so absolute that I could not give it voice. I could only hold it inside, a cold, dark seed of fear taking root where warmth used to be. The dust in the attic was a particular kind of dust. It was not the simple grime of neglect, but a fine, settled powder made from memories. Each mote swirling in the slanted afternoon light was a fragment of a life lived, a birthday celebrated, a Christmas morning embraced. I had come up here seeking refuge, a balm for the fresh, raw wound Marcus had left. I thought if I could just surround myself with the good times, the proof of the family we had built within these walls, the sting of his words would lessen. He had called this house a symbol of a system I did not understand, a system I had benefited from. He had exiled himself from its history, and in doing so, I felt exiled from my own. So I began to sort. The air was thick and still, smelling of old wood and dried-out Christmas tree needles. My hands traced the outlines of cardboard boxes labeled in my own fading script: Marcus, baby clothes, photo albums, Christmas decorations. I pulled open a flap and was greeted by a tiny, worn corduroy overall. I could almost feel the weight of his small body on my hip, hear his infectious giggle echoing from the rooms below. In another box, I found a stack of his elementary school art projects: clumsy clay pots and paintings of our house with a too large sun in a corner of the sky. Each object was an anchor to a past that now felt dangerously unmoored. It was when I was shifting a heavier box marked Mom's Things that I saw it. Tucked behind it, almost as if it wished to remain hidden, was a small metal lockbox. It was heavier than it looked, a dull gunmetal gray with the faint smell of old metal and time. I did not recognize it. It was not one of my boxes. This had belonged to my mother, Alina. I had gone through her possessions after she passed, or so I had thought. I must have missed this. The lock was a simple clasp, but it was sturdy and it was shut. There was no key. A strange feeling settled over me, a mixture of curiosity and a sudden, superstitious dread. My mother was a practical woman, not given to sentimentality or secrecy. What could be important enough to lock away? I carried the box over to the single bare bulb hanging from a rafter, its light weak and yellow. I found an old flathead screwdriver amidst a toolbox of my late husband's things. The metal of the box was stubborn. I had to wedge the tip of the screwdriver into the seam of the clasp and lean my whole weight into it. The sound of protesting metal screeched through the silent attic, a jarring intrusion into the soft quiet of memory. With a final, grating pop, the lock gave way. I lifted the lid slowly. The inside was not filled with jewels or stacks of cash, as some childish part of me had half imagined. It was neat, orderly, just like my mother. There were a few bundles of papers tied with faded ribbon. On top lay a small, velvet pouch. I opened it and tipped its contents into my palm. It was a single, tarnished silver locket. I had never seen my mother wear it. I clicked it open. Inside was a tiny, sepia-toned photograph of a woman I did not recognize, her eyes serious, her hair swept up in a style from another century. My grandmother, perhaps? My mother rarely spoke of her own childhood. Setting the locket aside, I turned to the papers. The first bundle was legal documents, their paper brittle and yellowed at the edges. The formal, typed words swam before my eyes at first. Then a name snapped into focus: Alina Roberts, my mother. The document was a property deed. I expected to see the familiar language of inheritance, a transfer upon death. But that was not what I read. This was a bill of sale, a transaction. My eyes scanned the date. It was from the year before I turned 10, the year we had moved into this house. I had always believed the story. My mother had inherited this house from a distant, kindly aunt. It was our piece of luck, our salvation from the cramped apartment we had lived in before. It was the foundation upon which I had built my entire understanding of our life. This house was a gift, a legacy. But the document told a different story. It detailed a purchase, a sale price that, even adjusted for time, seemed impossibly large. And then I saw the names of the sellers. The Millers, our neighbors, the kindly old couple who had always given me candy canes at Christmas. My heart began to beat a strange, heavy rhythm against my ribs. I fumbled for the next page. It was a carbon copy of a letter, written on the law firm letterhead of Caldwell & Sons. The language was dense, legalese, but certain phrases leapt out as if they were on fire. Restrictive covenant, preservation of neighborhood character, non-conveyance to persons of color. The words did not make sense at first. They were from a history book, not from my life. I read them again and then again. The Millers, the original owners, had tried to force my mother out. They had not wanted us here. This house, my sanctuary, the place where I had raised my son, had been built on a foundation of rejection. The walls seemed to shrink in around me. The happy memories trapped in the boxes suddenly felt like lies. My hands were trembling as I reached for the last item in the box. It was a sheet of stationery, folded in thirds. The handwriting was my mother's, elegant and precise, but the ink was blurred in places as if by water or tears. It was not addressed to anyone. It was a letter never sent. "My dearest Sharon," it began. I had to stop. I took a deep, shuddering breath, the dusty air catching in my throat. I could hear my own pulse in my ears. I continued reading. "I write this down because I cannot bear to speak the words aloud to you. I look at you, so young and so bright, so full of the joy this new house has brought you. I cannot tarnish that joy with the truth of how we came to be here. You believe we inherited this house, and I have let you believe it. It is a kinder story. The truth is, the Millers did not want us here. They presented me with a legal document, a covenant left over from when the neighborhood was built, that stated the house could not be sold to anyone who was not white. They said we had to leave. They said it was nothing personal. But Sharon, there is nothing more personal than being told you do not belong in a home you have already made your own. I saw the fear in your eyes when the lawyer came to the door. I saw you clutching your doll, not understanding. I could not let that fear be the lesson you learned, so I fought. I found a lawyer of our own, a brave man who told me these covenants were increasingly unenforceable, that the world was changing, however slowly. I used every penny I had saved, every bit of my inheritance from my own mother, and I bought this house from them. I bought it not because it was a gift, but because it was a fight. I bought it as an act of defiance. I bought it to be a sanctuary for you, the kind of security I was never afforded as a child. This house is not an inheritance from a past we never knew. It is a purchase, paid for with the blood and sweat of a struggle I vowed you would never have to fully understand. I did it for you. I hid the truth to spare you the pain. I wanted you to have a childhood free of the weight of that anger, that injustice. I wanted this house to be filled with only light and love. Perhaps that was wrong. Perhaps I have sheltered you too much. But it was the choice of a mother who wanted more for her daughter. Please, if you are reading this, understand that every nail in this house, every blade of grass in the yard, was chosen for you. It was always for you. The letter ended there. The paper fell from my numb fingers and fluttered to the dusty floorboards. I sat back on my heels, the full weight of the revelation crushing me. All these years I had lived in a narrative of passive receipt, a story of luck, but my mother had not been passive. She had been a warrior. She had engaged in a silent, desperate battle for this piece of ground, not for herself, but for me. She had carried the burden of that fight alone, hiding the scars so I would never see them. Marcus's words came rushing back to me, but now they were refracted through this new, painful lens. He was right. I had not understood. I had benefited from a struggle I never knew existed. The foundation of my life was not simple luck, but a hard-won victory in a war I did not even know had been fought. The house groaned around me, no longer just a repository of my memories, but a vault containing my mother's secret strength and silent sacrifice. And as I looked at the open, empty box, I realized the truth I had unearthed was only the beginning. The real story, the full weight of my mother's life and the inheritance she had truly left me, was still buried, and I knew I had only just begun to dig. The walk to my mother's apartment building felt longer than the few blocks it actually was. Every step was heavy, a stark contrast to the hurried, angry strides I had taken just a day before. Keisha walked beside me, her presence a quiet anchor in the storm of my own thoughts. We did not speak much. There was too much unsaid between us, a chasm bridged temporarily by a shared, uneasy curiosity. My mother's invitation had not been a request. It had been a summons, her voice on the phone stripped of its usual defensive armor, replaced by a flat, weary tone I had not heard since my father's funeral. The building was a neat, anonymous brick structure, a world away from the sprawling, character-filled home she had refused to leave. Her apartment on the third floor smelled of lemons and old books. It was tidy, almost sterile, a life condensed into 2 rooms. She was waiting for us, seated at a small wooden table. And there it was, between a vase of silk flowers and a porcelain figurine of a spaniel, the metal box. It sat there, a dull gray Pandora's box that contained all the secrets of my family. My mother, Sharon, looked older in the harsh afternoon light filtering through the slatted blinds. The lines on her face seemed deeper, etched not by anger but by a profound exhaustion. Her hands, usually clasped tightly in her lap when she was nervous, rested flat on the table on either side of the box. She gestured for us to sit. "Thank you for coming," she said, her voice low. She did not look at me, but her gaze included both of us. "I know the last few days have been difficult." Keisha nodded, her expression carefully neutral. "We are glad to be here, Sharon." There was a long silence, filled only by the distant hum of city traffic. My mother's eyes finally settled on the box. She did not open it immediately. Instead, she seemed to be gathering strength from its cold, unyielding surface. "I have spent my whole life being angry about that house," she began, her words measured. Angry at your father for leaving me with it, angry at the city for wanting to take it, angry at you, Marcus, for not understanding why I could not just let it go. She finally looked at me, and the anger I expected was not there. There was only a deep, resonant sadness. But I was wrong. My anger was misplaced. It was a shield. I was protecting the wrong story. She slowly, deliberately lifted the lid of the box. Inside, there were no stacks of money, no glittering jewels. There were papers, yellowed and brittle with age, and a single, small black and white photograph. She picked up the photograph, holding it with a reverence that was almost painful to witness. "This is my mother," she said, placing the photo on the table so we could see it. It was a picture of a young woman, her face sharp and intelligent, standing in front of a shack with a dirt yard. She was unsmiling, her gaze holding a challenge that transcended the decades. Her name was Alina. My father, your grandfather, died in a mill accident when I was 5. There was no insurance, no settlement. It was just a tragedy. And then the landlord came. He told my mother that a woman alone with a child could not possibly afford the rent. He gave her a week to get out. My mother's jaw tightened. We had nowhere to go. Her family was gone. His family wanted nothing to do with us. We were going to be put out on the street. My mother, she was a cleaning woman for a wealthy family across town. She begged the landlord for more time. She went to the church. She went to the local charity. Doors were closed in her face. The world, Marcus, had decided that we did not deserve a place in it. I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. I had never known my grandmother. She had died before I was born. My mother had always spoken of her in vague, glowing terms, a strong woman, a good woman, but she had never shared this history, this pain. "How did you get the house?" Keisha asked softly, her voice full of an empathy that shamed me. "A miracle," my mother said, a faint, bitter smile touching her lips. "Or an act of stubbornness. The man who owned the land where our house is now, he was not a kind man, but he was a practical one. He had a small, dilapidated house on the edge of his property that he could not rent to anyone. It was falling down. He told my mother that if she could make it livable, she could live there rent-free for a year. After that, if she could pay, she could stay." She paused, taking a slow breath. She worked every waking hour. She scrubbed floors by day, and by the light of a kerosene lamp she patched the roof, she fixed the floorboards, she nailed siding over the holes in the walls. Her hands were always raw and bleeding. I would fall asleep to the sound of her hammer. When it stopped, I knew she had finally collapsed from exhaustion. That house, Marcus, was not given to us. It was built with her blood and her sweat and her tears. It was a fortress. It was the one thing in the world that no one could take from us, because we had fought for every splinter of it. The room seemed to shrink. The comfortable apartment vanished, and I was suddenly a child again, standing in the yard of the house I had taken for granted. I saw the familiar gables and the porch not as charming architectural features, but as the result of my grandmother's desperate labor. I saw my mother, not as a stubborn old woman clinging to a relic, but as a little girl who had watched her mother build a fortress against a cruel world. The shame was a physical weight, crushing the breath from my lungs. I had accused her of being irrational, of living in the past. I had never once considered that the past was the very foundation of the house. "I am so sorry, Mom," I whispered, the words inadequate, a pebble thrown into an ocean of her sacrifice. "I did not know, you never told me." "My mother made me promise," she said, her voice cracking for the first time. "She said, Sharon, you must never tell anyone how we got this house. You must never let them know we were that desperate. They will use it against you. You hold your head high and you act as if you have always belonged here." So I did. For 60 years, I have held my head high. I defended that house because it was not just a house. It was her victory. It was my mother's legacy. And when you wanted to sell it, Marcus, it felt like you were spitting on her grave. It felt like you were letting them win. Keisha reached across the table and took my mother's hand. Tears were streaming down Keisha's face now, mirroring my own. "I am so sorry, Sharon," she said. "I had no idea. I was only thinking about numbers, about practicality. I did not see the soul of it." My mother squeezed Keisha's hand, a gesture of forgiveness that was so simple and so profound it broke my heart. "You were not supposed to see it," she said. "I hid it too well. I hid it from everyone, even from myself sometimes. I made the house the important thing, when the important thing was always the people inside it. My mother did not build a house for the sake of a building. She built a home for me." Then she let go of Keisha's hand and reached into the box one last time. She pulled out a single, folded document, I knew what it was before she laid it on the table. The deed. She smoothed it with her palm, her touch gentle, a final caress. "My fight is over," she said, looking directly at me. "I have carried this weight for a lifetime. I see now that I was trying to protect a memory, but a memory does not need a roof and walls to survive. It lives here." She tapped her chest. "The house's future is no longer mine to define. It is yours, both of yours." She pushed the deed across the table until it was directly in front of me. The paper seemed to glow, imbued with the gravity of the moment. This was not a piece of property being transferred. It was a legacy. It was a story. It was the responsibility to honor a sacrifice I was only now beginning to comprehend. "You must decide what to do with it," she said. "But whatever you do, you must remember what it truly is. It is not an asset. It is a testament." I looked from the deed to my mother's face, now peaceful in a way I had never seen it. The anger, the hurt, the pride, all had dissolved, leaving behind a quiet serenity. She had unburdened herself of the truth, and in doing so had burdened me with its meaning. Keisha's hand found mine under the table, our fingers intertwining, a united front once more. We had come here fractured, but we were leaving bound together by a painful, beautiful, terrifying new understanding. The house was ours now. And as I looked at that simple piece of paper, I had no idea what we were going to do. Only that every choice we made from this moment forward would be measured against the ghost of a brave woman with a hammer, building a fortress in the dark.